my pleasure to welcome all of you back for the 2015-16 academic year. It's great to see so many of you here back at campus. My pleasure to welcome all of our new staff members and faculty. I hope all of you had a restful, enjoyable, and productive summer. I certainly did. I took the trip of my life, 2,500 miles on the road through 7 states, starting in Nevada, through Utah, into Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. And it was exhilarating to see what a grand country this is, to encounter people unlike those we're accustomed to meet here in Connecticut, to see billboards that we don't often see on Connecticut roads. There's a curious compulsion in some states to remind people what the 10 Commandments are in case they've forgotten any of them. And you're probably not surprised that in some of those states, impeach Obama is something you frequently see on lawns. But it was great. I mean, I got to spend an evening with some unemployed miners in Idaho at Foxy's, a little place that doubled as a neighborhood bar, kind of like Cheers. They asked me my name as soon as I walked in the door. So it was first name basis from then on. They did serve black bean burgers, which was kind of interesting. I didn't expect that my vegetarian wife would be able to eat in Libby, Montana, or Libby, Idaho. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience. I've come back to campus completely rejuvenated, as I hope all of you have. It is going to be a great year. We've, as the president said this morning, we as an institution need to remember how successful we have been as an institution. I mean, he likes to tell the story that when he came here, he asked people what our graduation rate was, and people didn't even know. In other words, at that point, no one even thought that was a meaningful metric, how many of our students actually graduated. When they found out it was 40%, they didn't seem particularly concerned. Well, that sounds like a pretty good number to me. Actually, it's not that good a number. It sort of put us near the bottom of the pile, and we made that a priority as an institution. And here we are 10 years later, and it's at 52%, which is higher than it's ever been in the history of the institution. Everybody else was losing enrollment. We shared that concern here. The institution got galvanized. And our enrollments have been healthy for the last couple of years. We're still waiting to see what happens this semester, but it's looking pretty good. Anyway, so I kind of want to build on that theme and build on the theme that the president raised this morning by looking at this question of success, asking ourselves, what has prevented us from achieving the kind of success that we might aspire to, and what we might be able to do about it. So let's start with, what do we mean by success? And some of you who have been here a while will remember that a couple of years, the president kind of shared this vision of kind of going good to great. What would it take for this institution to get to the next level? We've always had peer institutions against which we measured ourselves, but who were the next tier? And what would it take for us to be like them? And what I would suggest is that in order for us to get to that next level of success, we need to enable a larger percentage of students to be successful at our institution. And I think to do that, we need to be cognizant of the kinds of factors that have prevented us from enabling our students to achieve that success in the past. Some of these you heard from the president, some of them you're well aware of. Declining high school enrollment certainly prevents us from anticipating the same number of students we've always had. We have to work a little bit harder and be a little bit more creative in order to get them. As the president noted, we have experienced declining state support, so we don't have the resources that we could use to invest more fully in student success. This is a highly regulated state. As a state institution, there are a lot of things that we can't do. We can't be as entrepreneurial as some of our some of our private competitors. And then this last one, I don't raise it to be controversial, and I'm not raising it because we're about to go through contract negotiations, but I do want to come back to it at a certain point, that collective bargaining agreements spell out a certain vision of the university or a certain vision of what it means to be a faculty member. And conditions for faculty members and for higher education have changed dramatically in the time since that collective bargaining agreement was put in place. And we know historically that those agreements do not change. So that vision is being passed on fairly immutably from one agreement to the next, while conditions change dramatically. And I will come back to that. So in contrast to these external constraints, which I think are largely the conditions under which we have to operate, I want to focus on a couple of internal constraints that I think we can do something about. The first is, I want to point to two powerful internal constraints that directly thwart our ability to make internal change. Because if you don't understand the problem, it's very difficult to design an appropriate solution. So in this first example, we're constrained by our inability or failure to draw appropriate conclusions from the mountains of data that we collect about our students. To use a phrase I learned recently, we are data-rich, information-poor, DRIP. In the second example, we're constrained very differently by factors about which we have almost no understanding. Namely, what influence do the largely non-cognitive effects of ethnic, cultural, socioeconomic, and psychological factors have on our students' success? These are the two topics I will focus on today. First, what do our data suggest we should focus on to help more students? And I'm going to give 3 examples. The second is, what can we do to better serve an increasingly diverse student body? My intention is to suggest that these questions are very closely related. So we're going to talk a little bit about the need to use data to inform decisions about student success. If our goal is to improve student success, can we identify some obstacles to students' timely graduation? Let's start with courses that consistently have high DFW, students who get Ds, Fs, or withdraw from the course. So here's the list of the 16 courses over the last 3 years. Now, the first 10 all have over 30% failure rates, or DFW rates, and they all affect 250 or more students per year. The last 6 don't have that high a rate, but you can see the number of students that fall into that category. So these 16 courses have a tremendous impact on our students' success. I believe these courses raise a number of interesting questions, or important questions. The first is whether we should ever be complacent about courses with consistently low success rates. Instead, shouldn't we be asking ourselves why our students experience those difficulties, and what could we do to help them overcome those difficulties without compromising our standards or lowering our expectations? How could the course be redesigned to help more students succeed? What additional supports could be implemented to help students overcome those difficulties? What additional practice could students get applying material? Could students receive more frequent feedback on their performance? These are all options that many faculty members have adopted to increase student support without lowering standards. The second question addresses a more sensitive but no less relevant concern. However much individual faculty members may defend the objectivity of their respective grading patterns, there is an accumulation of evidence that individual faculty members have fairly consistent grading patterns. In other words, students in some faculty members will consistently receive higher grades, whereas students in another faculty member's class will consistently receive lower grades. I've seen this confirmed by data from multiple sections of the same course over several years. I mean, it reminds me, like if you think of faculty members who consistently give students lower grades, I'm kind of reminded of the joke of the student who came in to the professor and he complained, he said, "Professor, I don't believe I deserve that F." And the professor's response was, "Well, I'm sorry, but that's the lowest grade I could give you." But when a faculty member consistently gives a higher percentage of low grades than his or her peers, does that mean he or she has higher standards than those peers? Does it mean that their peers are easier graders or give easy A's? Or could it mean that they're making it unreasonably difficult? Anyone can make it difficult for students to succeed. Challenging them to succeed is a very different matter. Or could it mean that we're making it unreasonably difficult for many of their students to be successful in their course the way it is presently taught and evaluated? A closer look at the difficulties students are having might suggest the need to rethink the way certain concepts are taught. The third question has its own sensitivities. You may have noted that 8 of the 16 DFW courses are taught by the math department, and all are 100 to 200 level courses. For those students who are required to take those courses, they present serious obstacles to their success, and I believe it's important for us as a university community to consider the necessity for those obstacles. If we seriously believe that our existing math requirements are justified for all students, then we need to figure out how to redesign these courses, possibly with the help of technology, to help more students succeed. But if we're not persuaded that all of our students need our current level and type of quantitative literacy, then I think it's time for us to consider coming up with more relevant and appropriate requirements, as many other universities have done. This is a slide that comes to compliment of a man that I'll mention several times in this presentation. He had a huge impact on me at a conference that I went to. His name is James A. Anderson. He's the chancellor of Fayetteville State University, and he's an experienced and highly respected consultant in higher education. He compiled this slide, so I can't take credit for it, and I won't. You can't argue with me about the relevance of those bottlenecks. But the concept here, which I want to share with you, and I think it really is important, is that research has shown that on the way to a degree, students have to do well in certain key courses, and this is true in virtually every major. And so it is incumbent upon us to identify what those critical courses are and to identify where in those courses students struggle. And then with that knowledge, develop appropriate interventions. In other words, develop modules or supplementary instruction or whatever. So the question I would ask each of you in each of your majors, what are the critical gateway courses for success in each major? Which aspects of those courses present particular problems for students? And what can we do that more students complete their courses successfully? Now this third example, you heard this morning. The president and I talked about whether he should include the same data that I was going to use, and I said, yeah, go ahead and use it. Because I think it's really important, and I want to build on it in a way that expands on his presentation. As he said to us this morning, there is a national kind of a norm that you lose half of the students you're going to lose in your first year, and you lose the second half of the students you're going to lose in the next 5, okay? Which means that if you have an 80% retention rate as we do, we should have, and most people with 80% retention rates do have 60% graduation rates. As the president mentioned today, it's different at Central. Our 80% retention rate has produced a 52% graduation rate, and that's the best we've ever done, right? And here's another interesting statistic that he didn't mention. that sort of puts it in perspective. At comparable institutions, and we looked at 88 other institutions, for every one student they lose in their first year, they lose 1.09 over the next 5. For every one student that we lose in our first year, we lose 1.32 over the next 5. That makes a tremendous difference. So I'm not providing answers here. I will suggest some solutions later, but I think these are the kinds of questions that we as an institution need to be looking at seriously. If we focused on graduation rate in the past, if we focused on enrollment in the recent past, we need to be looking at what we can do for students who come back for their second year but fail to graduate. In what ways are we failing them? In what ways are we failing to help them get across the finish line? And what could we do to improve their likelihood of persistence? So here's an example of one group of students that falls into this statistic. I know it's kind of a messy chart, but this shows us students who have accumulated 90 plus credits and who are no longer enrolled at Central. Not a huge number. In fact, it's improved slightly in the last year. The total is 71 students, so 5%. We've improved it to 4%. Only 54 students fell into that category, but that's 54 students who have finished their junior year and who have one more year of college or less, and they're gone. I'm not sure where they are. I just got these statistics last week, and it's concerning to me, and part of what we'll do is try and find out if we can contact those students, and we can encourage them to return. So the first two examples that I presented consider student difficulties that are primarily academic, the DFW courses and the gateway courses and the bottlenecks. And they could be addressed by making changes to courses. The third example of failing to retain students beyond their second year, however, presents a more complex challenge. True, some of these students may be leaving for academic reasons, others may be leaving for financial reasons, but there are still others who are leaving because they failed to connect to the university. We discovered that this was so when we reached out to eligible students who had failed to register for the next year. So part of the solution to retaining students depends on gaining a better understanding of the challenges, stressors, or obstacles our students face. With that knowledge, we may be able to design appropriate interventions. Simply instituting programs or interventions based on best practices may not fit the needs of our student population. I also want to suggest that we need to expand our understanding of diversity in dealing with students. Generalizations or inferences based only on race or ethnicity may not only be simplistic, but may even be unintentionally offensive. More specifically, I believe we need to become more nuanced in our understanding of the factors that contribute to or inhibit student success. I'll throw in just a little example. I don't know how many of you read the Chronicle, but there was an interesting article yesterday about homeless students. And in that article, there was the startling statistic that there are 60,000 homeless students in the United States. Most institutions have no ways of capturing this. The only way you can capture it is through the federal FAFSA, whatever FAFSA stands for, through FAFSA, right? And on that sheet, students who are under 23 have to self-identify as independent. That's the only way you can capture it. Well, according to our financial aid office, 21 of our students fit that category. That doesn't mean they're the only ones. That means we know we have 21 students who are homeless. Now, what does that mean? You may have that student in your class. You may never know. Is it important for you to try to find out that information? Would having that information be of value? Those are the kind of questions I want to ask next. What are the determinants of student success? Now, historically, we have relied on so-called academic measures. We've looked at GPAs, we've looked at class rank, we've looked at SAT, And we've also discovered that those are not reliable predictors of academic success. If at all, they don't predict anything beyond the first semester. But we are finding out that there are non-cognitive factors. And there's factors that don't fit into our traditional model of academic success that do have a tremendous influence on student success. So what do we mean by non-cognitive determinants? Some are internal. This is the work of Carol Dweck. We've got Marianne Fallon and Kate Wall who are doing this kind of work here on our campus. It's work we need to be aware of. They focused on grit. In other words, we found that students who stick to it, who persevere, who have grit, actually succeed at higher numbers than students who don't. But we also find that other non-cognitive factors have a significant bearing. Enthusiasm, also variously known as zest or passion, intellectual curiosity, social intelligence, the ability to interact in meaningful ways with others. Others reflect the influence of external factors, and I will come back to this later in this talk. To what extent is the institution committed to student success, which is the topic we're talking about today? Teamwork. To what extent are students engaged in collaboration with other students? Are they part of networks and communities? And what kind of social support do they have, be it family, be it friends, be it mentors? So what I want to do is I want to share with you examples of statements that illustrate very different yet equally invisible challenges confronting today's college students. The first example is actually from an incoming CCSU student. It's anonymous, but it's authentic, also impressive, I think. And the second actually appeared in this past Sunday's Sunday Review, New York Times, and it was an article which you may have seen from a young Latina woman who I think is now an English professor, who talks about, I think the title of the article is Bringing Your Parents to College, and it was about her first visit to college. She went to Cornell. So here are these, they're kind of long. Read them, kind of skim over them. I'll highlight a couple of things that I think are really interesting about this statement. I want you to note that this student informs us that his teachers tried to discourage him from coming to college. He did not feel he would be able to succeed. He talks about being terrified of failure. He also says that I did not feel the need to discuss this with admissions. So whatever he's going through, he's not sharing. But then he met someone. He calls her a tutor. I'd call her a mentor. She encouraged me and guided me when I needed help. She gave me the courage. And then he says, I worked hard and consistently. Okay? So that's the first one. Here's the second one. This is the one from the New York Times. And this woman, she's just received the assignment for her English paper, and she doesn't understand a word that's in it. She says she knows it, she understands it less than a non-English speaking grandmother would have. She thought it was a foreign language. And then she says, like the first guy, I felt like I'd made a terrible mistake. In other words, feeling like she's not made for college. She says they did a great job of recruiting me, but they didn't give her any idea what they were supposed to do when she made it to campus. Now, there's all kinds of stuff that's affecting our students that we can't even begin to imagine. Like the first one, she was mostly keeping to myself to hide the fact that I was a very special kind of lost. And then also like the last one. So I got back to work too, and get back to work became a kind of mantra for me. So what are the takeaways for educators? First one, many students have doubts about their ability to succeed. They may have been discouraged, like our incoming student, by people who said you're just not college level material. Or they may just never have come from a background that went to college and didn't believe that they really belong there. As we saw in both of those examples, they're not going to come right out and tell us. The tutor who helped that student, I think, is a critical lesson for all of us. And the last one, true in both of them. Motivated students who persevere are more likely to succeed. And there's that grit thing, right? Both of the students get back to work. I worked hard and consistently. I did all the assignments. So here's what the research is beginning to show us about the impact of non-cognitive factors on student success. These are all direct quotes from studies that have been published. Success rates for students with low readiness. In other words, these students are academically not highly qualified, but high effort, more than 3 times more successful than those who are academically qualified but didn't apply themselves as hard. Here's a finding from a recent study undertaken by Educational Testing Service. For students with essentially identical academic profiles, non-academic factors entirely determine the likely success. It's a pretty bold statement, but it shows the impact of these non-cognitive factors. And then finally, a third study published in the Journal of College Student Retention, the SBLC is Student Bridge Learning Community. It was a special program in the summer. A significant direct effect of academic confidence on the academic performance was found of SBLC members. Okay? So these are things of which we would benefit from learning more about and understanding better. So where I want to go next with this presentation is to talk about, considering what I've just suggested about these factors, what are some strategies that we can use to help more students succeed? So the first one, pretty self-evident, I think we need to try to understand more about these non-cognitive factors. The better we understand how non-cognitive factors affect students, the better able we are to assist them. The more we learn about our students, the more sensitive and responsive we can become to the struggles they face as college students. So one approach that I want to suggest, and this is another gift from Professor Anderson, whom I mentioned earlier, this is something that he does. He instead of talking about faculty members kind of interviewing students or trying to draw out things that they're reluctant to say, give students an opportunity to provide you with that information yourself. So he's adopted these materials to elicit or to promote student introspection and to elicit information about some of their experiences in class. So here he's trying to get a sense of how his students are reacting to his class, trying to get a sense of the bottlenecks that they're experiencing in their classes. The second one gets more at these kind of non-cognitive factors. What are the 2 primary factors that will influence your choice of a major? What are the major out-of-class stressors, and so on? I'll be posting all this material, but some of you may want to adapt materials like these to your class or develop some that are more suited to your own students. The second thing is something that I don't want to spend too much time on, but I want you to be aware of. The second approach would be to educate students about the resources and strategies that will help them deal more effectively with the non-cognitive factors that provide stressors in their lives and may adversely affect their ability to succeed academically. We need to help our students to acquire the non-cognitive attitudes, qualities, skills that are highly correlated with success. Now the first one, social and emotional learning, this is something that has literally become embedded in the fabric of K through 12 education. In fact, Dean Alfano from our School of Education and Professional Studies is putting forth a proposal for a center of excellence for social and emotional learning. It's going to become part of the curriculum for all teacher educators. What's interesting is that nothing comparable has really been done at the college level. So the work that Marianne and Kate are doing is really kind of groundbreaking in this regard. The schools have understood that helping students become socially and emotionally intelligent, able to handle their emotions, able to interact in meaningful and positive ways with people in their environment, are critical to their success. Carolyn Dweck and Jeffrey Walton have done work on academic tenacity, which is some of this character strength stuff. What are the qualities that students need to be successful in class. And what's interesting is they've shown that it's possible to teach these. In other words, you're not born with grit or curiosity, but you can. There are thoughtful ways in which students can be educated to acquire them. And then the last four, these are things that we all agree students need to understand. Students need to be able to make critical judgments about the morass of information that surrounds them. Students are one of the most indebted groups in this country. They have no idea how to handle money. They're massively in debt as a group. They don't know anything about interest rates. They don't know anything about mortgages. They don't know anything about credit cards. We do them a disservice by letting them out in the world, since we're sort of that step between them and independence without some understanding of what that is. Healthy choices and lifestyles, same deal. We've had all kinds of problems with children and our whole society making unhealthy choices. That should be part of our planning. And we should be doing more. You know, you've heard me say this before. We should be doing more to ensure that every student has some plan when they come out of here for what they want to do. And it's not about being, vocational. It's about you're going to want to work somewhere. So regardless of what you're in, what kind of work do you want to do? And what are the opportunities for people who are studying what you are studying in the world out there? But the third approach that I want to mention, and the one I really want to dwell on for the rest of this, this presentation, is even if we can't get at what is inhibiting the success of every individual student, we do know that a lot of our students are struggling with things that we can't begin to imagine, whether they're homeless, whether they're victims of discrimination, whether they're suffering financially. The one thing we can do is make sure that when they're here, they feel welcome, they feel valued, they feel respected. And that's what we can do. So I think as an institution, we need to be more mindful about developing the kinds of skills, and there are lots of them already among you, to become more culturally competent and more culturally responsive to our students, and how to help build community among them. So this is the vision that I'd like now to explore a bit further. But I want to start by asking an important question, right? I don't think anybody would dispute the importance of making students feel more connected to the university, and that doing so is critical to their success. Students who don't feel like they belong here are unlikely to be among our success stories. But if we all agree about the importance of connecting students to the university, whose responsibility is it to ensure that we do so? So to invoke my new mentor, James Anderson, he tells us that when he visits college campuses, he makes a practice of randomly asking people around campus whose responsibility it is to promote student success. When he hears respondents give him answers such as student affairs or the learning center or the advising center, he concludes that that institution has not embraced an institutional commitment to student success. Everyone may endorse a common goal, but implementing that goal is seen as primarily the responsibility of one or more units at the institution. In contrast, respondents at universities that have an institutional culture of student success typically describe student success as everyone's responsibility. So first, I want to acknowledge that there are some important efforts already underway here at CCSU to create a culture of success. But what I want to stress is that creating such a culture is predicated on the idea that students cannot be successful unless they feel they're part of a community that welcomes, supports, and respects them. As I said earlier, external non-cognitive factors such as social support and institutional commitment can play an important role in student success. So the three examples that I've mentioned represent significant represent significant initiatives to create a welcoming and supportive environment here at Central. So first, the Campus of Compassion. This was initiated last year and has already been affirmed by the Faculty Senate. The President is appointing a presidential committee on creating a Campus of Compassion. And the Senate endorsed a statement that compassion helps to build human connections and a sense of community and plays a critical role in childhood development and the emotional health and well-being of all humans. The Student Services Collective, the Here For You at CCSU, was something that I believe was started by Betsy Fangiulo, our bursar, who brought together her colleagues in student support offices and acknowledged the fact that they never talk to each other. And they don't have very little knowledge about what is going on in each of these respective offices. And they've been meeting now regularly to try to share information, to understand a little bit more what the other does so that they can make thoughtful and informed referrals to students and cut down on students getting the runaround. I don't know, can't help you, go see somebody. And then the final one, this was the work of a group of mostly faculty who received an Innovation Fund grant. Reginald Simmons and in criminology, Evelyn Phillips and Sherry Fafunwa in the Africana Center, the Latino Center, Luis Recoder, and Awilda Riasco used an innovation grant fund to train and pay mentors who were juniors and seniors from minority populations as mentors to sophomores. So here was an example of an initiative where we're focusing now on that group of students who historically, we lose in greater numbers than other institutions. But the question I'd like to consider with you now is, what does this mean for faculty members? Because faculty are integral to the institution's academic mission, no meaningful change in campus culture can occur without faculty buy-in and engagement. Faculty members are uniquely positioned to promote the success of our students, but are our traditional conceptions of the professoriate and corresponding institutional structures aligned with that purpose? That's the question I'd like to conclude by considering. So here are a series of questions that I believe get at the core of what it means to be a faculty member and whether our conceptions need to evolve in response to profound changes within our profession. In other words, when we say that student success or graduation rates or enrollment are an institutional priority, does the individual faculty member have any responsibility to that priority? Is the individual faculty member responsible for student success? Should they be accountable for student success, such that if their students don't succeed, should they be trying to do something different or change? And to what extent do we rely on faculty members to identify students who need help and intervene to do so? And I'd even ask, to what extent are faculty members being prepared for this kind of work? To what extent are PhD granting institutions who provide us with many of our faculty members preparing faculty for that kind of work? Because in the time that I've been in this business, which is probably longer than most people here, the conception of what it means to be a professor has not changed at all, and I suspect it hadn't changed much before that. The work of professors is to teach, to do research, and to perform service. But what do we mean by those activities? What does it mean to teach, to produce scholarship, or to perform service? And the reason I'm asking that question is, has or should that conception change? So now we come to the part that I mentioned earlier, that I would come back to kind of the collective bargaining agreement, because it does kind of codify what it means to be a faculty member. So the first one, take teaching, which is our primary load credit activity. The collective bargaining agreement, which I referenced earlier, contains the word teaching, but it does not refer to either student learning or student success. The only required measure for evaluating teaching is the student opinion survey, which each department can approve for its faculty. A joint CCSU AAUP proposal for a uniform set of questions focused on student learnings was rejected. To date, most departments still use the same student opinion survey, which focuses entirely on the behaviors of the teacher, such as whether he distributed a syllabus or she starts class on time. The model of the teacher as someone who professes dates from a time when teachers were the only ones who possessed knowledge, and their role was to pass on that knowledge. There are three reasons why this model of teaching has become obsolete. In the first place, we are no longer the only possessors of knowledge. I mean, as many people out on the internet are willing to tell you, from Coursera to edX, you can get a complete college education for free online. You've got the DIYU model, where you can essentially get everything. You may not get the credential, you won't get the sheepskin from the institution, but you can get the knowledge. So the idea that we still need to be the purveyors of knowledge has been made obsolete by the fact that the knowledge is out there. The second is that this model of the faculty member as purveyor of knowledge ignores a whole body of research on how people learn. And we know that people who learn passively by listening to someone tell you something forget most of it as soon as they're done. And then finally, student populations are far less homogeneous than they ever were. I mean, that model of teaching may have been fine if you could make some assumptions about the homogeneity of your students, most of whom were from one ethnic group. They came from relative middle class and upper middle class families. They had good high school educations, and you could assume that whatever you said they would all get. If you've got students, if you've got a homeless student in your class, if you've got a student who comes from a very, very poor family and has to work, if you have a student who's got a family to take care of, if you've got a student who's dealing with illness, you can't make those kinds of assumptions. They're not all coming from the same quality high schools. They don't all know as much. They're not all as invested or as confident about even being there. So I believe that faculty members should be far less focused on teaching than on making sure their students are learning. The devotion to covering the material, which I've often heard, I used to be in the faculty development business, and faculty would say, I'd love to be able to do that, but I really can't fit into my class. I've got to cover the material. But covering the material is a red herring. I mean, what justification is there for a teacher to know she's covered the material if students have not fully understood the content, if students have only learned enough to be able to regurgitate the content, or if students are unlikely to remember most of the content after the course is over? Once teachers become more focused on student learning than on their own teaching, they will need to attend to the learning needs of individual students as opposed to teaching in an entire class. And that's kind of what this sort of the recurring theme about trying to connect individual students to the institution. And I think a more learning-focused model is a way to do that. This will also provide more opportunities to engage students actively. So here are 4 adjustments in teaching that all faculty members can make to their courses to make them more responsive to the learning needs of individual students. I mean, I imagine this is not new to a lot of you, but there may be some of you who might not have considered referring students to content outside of class, who may not have experimented with the value of giving students an opportunity to apply knowledge that they acquire in class, or, and I think even more importantly, who have not considered how critically important it is to give student frequent feedback on the work that they're doing and to give it to them early in the class. So this advice aligns directly, it's not new, with the principles of good practice in undergraduate education that Chickering and Gamson outlined in 1987, who encourage contact between students and faculty, cooperation among students, active learning, and respect for diverse talents and ways of knowing. Adapting this advice will not only promote student learning, but also keep faculty members informed about the progress of their own students' learning. And here I want to show you an example of something that one of our faculty members, Carlos Liar Muriente, sent me the other day. It's a short article about a professor at the University of Michigan, and it is kind of cryptic, and I'm not expecting anybody to rush out and do something like this, but I want to show that at an institution like the University of Michigan, a professor of science became concerned that his teaching was not sufficiently aligned to the needs of individual students, and he went out and developed a technological solution. We are investing in some of those, and I'll touch on that at the end of my presentation. But here's just an excerpt from that piece. But it also mattered where students came from. I mean, this is the teacher realizing, and what kind of high school science they had experienced. Having that simple information laid out so clearly made him rethink teaching. He used to approach the class as if every student was a blank slate, starting in the same place. It's clear to him now that this was a ridiculous assumption, so he wanted to be responsive to each of his students, but with as many as 700 introductory physics students, that seemed impossible, so he found this other software that they were using in the medical school that was sending these very targeted messages to people whom they wanted to influence in particular ways. And he found a way to create this software, which he calls eCoach, that sends message to students as they need to get them. So the next issue that I want to bring up that has to do with the conception of the faculty member also comes back to the vision of the professoriate that's embedded in the collective bargaining agreement. The collective bargaining agreement makes only one reference to, quote, giving adequate advising to assure the pursuit of sound educational objectives. And that's the only reference to it in the whole document as part of a faculty member's responsibility. However, there are no criteria for evaluating or holding faculty accountable for advising. The CBA specifies that faculty members must maintain a minimum number of office hours per week, but it is not clear that this activity is considered part of faculty members' load credit activity or to be evaluated as such. So office hours or any kind of contact with student provide the best opportunities for faculty members to interact one-on-one with their students, and those interactions may be decisive in connecting students to the university. However, for these interactions to have the effect on students, faculty must be willing to embrace them as integral to their work, as times for engaging students meaningfully about their academic progress and plans, and for providing the guidance and encouragement to help them master challenges. Faculty members as advisors and mentors are critical to fostering a culture of student success. And so the reason I invoked the collective bargaining agreement, I think you probably all agree with that, but the CBA does not identify that as a critical part of what you do, and yet it may make more difference in the success of your students than many of the things that you do. And then two other conceptions of the faculty member that I'd like to sort of raise as undergoing change or perhaps needing to evolve as the rest of the profession has evolved. Just as our notions of what it means to teach and to advise must evolve to meet the needs of a more diverse student body, so too does our understanding of what we call creative activity and productive service, especially at institutions such as ours that value providing educational access to students of diverse backgrounds and abilities, and that take pride in helping those students become successful. There's still much to be learned about what it takes to help our students be successful, and colleagues at institutions like ours will benefit greatly from carefully designed and replicable studies and experiments focused on student success in our classes and beyond. And finally, we need to expand our conception of productive faculty service to include contributions to projects beyond the classroom that contribute to student success, which could include outreach to prospective students, to majors or to alumni, collaborative projects with colleagues in other units, in other university units focused on student success, mentoring students, supporting the work of student organizations, or involving students in community-based activities. All of these could represent meaningful forms of faculty service that can make a significant contribution to promote the success of students on campus. All of these remarks address the larger questions of what it means to be a faculty member at an institution such as ours, and how that conception may need to change in response to changes in our student body. We will continue to debate this question long after the talk is over. So I want to leave you with two very practical, seemingly mundane suggestions, which, if widely implemented, I believe can by themselves have a measurable impact on student success. The first one, require attendance in all your classes. Requiring attendance is a simple but powerful way to connect students to your classes. I know that some of you have heard this, but it bears repeating. In all the extensive educational research about student success, attending class has been conclusively identified as the single variable most directly correlated with student success. Requiring attendance sends the all-important signal to any student who might be tempted to think no one cares or notices whether he or she is there, that going to class matters. In a perfect world, faculty members follow up with students who don't attend to let them know they were missed and to see if they need help. The second is to take advantage of our early alert system. It's been there and it's widely underutilized. This is one of the most effective tools for connecting students to the networks of support on our campus. We are going to be piloting a new early alert system this year, and we can have a tremendous impact on student success if every faculty member routinely logs on to let us know about students in your classes who are experiencing any kind of difficulty, whether it is academic or psychosocial. If we know students are experiencing difficulties, we can take the necessary steps to reach out to them. My overriding purpose today has been to suggest that making a concerted and collective effort to make our campus a more welcoming and engaging place for all of our students can have a strong positive effect on student retention and success. There are already many examples of faculty and staff who have dedicated themselves to this kind of work, and it has clearly had a positive effect on many of our students. But the fact that we are still losing more students after their second year than similar institutions suggests that we need to focus more attention on this problem. We will never be able to address or solve every student's individual problems, but it helps to recognize that many of our students do not feel completely at home on our campus. Some feel lost. Some feel they don't even belong here. Many doubt their ability to succeed. And even if we can't dispel all their concerns, surely it will help if we consistently make the effort to make every student feel welcome, valued, and respected. It might be as simple as smiling as you pass a student, or asking a student who seems lost if you can help them. Or it might involve reaching out to a student and discovering that in doing so, you've had a life-changing impact on them. So in my more optimistic moments, I try to envision the effect that we could all have on our institutional culture of success if we saw this as an integral part of our work. I believe it'll make a significant difference to our students. So in closing, I want to suggest that I don't want to lay this all on you, and I'm certainly not suggesting that a lot of this isn't already going on, but I kind of want to nudge you a little bit by saying we've been doing what we've been doing, and we still only have a 52% graduation rate. We still are losing more students after their second year. And so I think we need to think collectively, how can we change? I mean, if every individual changed his or her behavior in a slight way, if you became more intentional about greeting that student in the hall, or asking that student if you can be of help, or engaging a student who seems to be withdrawing from your classes, what a difference it could make. So I'm putting aside all my cynicism, and I'm speaking to you from the heart. I know from experience it can make a difference. I'm involved in a relationship right now with a young African-American male who's a student on our campus. I wasn't going to mention this, but he asked me to tell this to you. Someone I randomly met, he's a student in one of our graduate programs. We meet once a month for lunch. And little by little, I've learned from him, he's learned from me. It has changed both of our lives. It's an experience like no other for me. I haven't had friendships like that. It's a mentoring relationship, but it's very reciprocal. He knows a lot about culturally responsive teaching, and he's helping me to understand that. He's helping me to understand what it means to be him. And I'm trying to help him navigate higher education. So it can make a huge difference, trust me, and I'm speaking from the heart here. But I don't want it all to be on you. I think the institution can assume a lot of responsibility for promoting this. I think if we want faculty to be more engaged in promoting student success beyond the traditional ways of thinking about their work, then I think we need to find ways to support and incentivize faculty involvement in student success. I mean, I'll mention the Innovation Fund Awards that we did last year. Some of those programs are being funded again this year. This is supporting faculty to engage in student success. We need to beef up the faculty development that we do. A lot of you may want to do things, but say, I don't know how to respond. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how I don't know what culturally responsive teaching is. So clearly there's more support that we as an institution can provide in that area, and that's something that I want to look at in the coming year. We need to empower you, like that e-coach example that I shared from the University of Michigan. We are going to provide you with some very powerful tools. I mean, there's some things out there that can really help you. It goes back to that first slide about, data-rich, information-poor. These are tools that will provide you with meaningful information that can guide interventions. And then finally, I think this is critical. I heard a number of other colleagues sharing this idea. I mean, we need to be thinking about this when we hire colleagues. If this is something we're serious about, we need to make sure that the people that we hire share those values with us. And we need to encourage, make it part of our evaluation. We consider whether these are the kinds of people that we want to be part of a university that values success to the extent that we do. So I know it's a tall order. I've enjoyed working with you for the past decade, and we've accomplished a lot. I look forward to working with you on this venture, and I'm confident that we can make the kind of difference that our students need us to make. So thank you, and have a great year.